table 6. Ms. Ford, good afternoon again. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time to come to address the committee on the matters addressed in the report of the Auditor General of the Transport Board and its operations 2015-2018. You are accompanied again by Mr. Pierce, who is offering counsel to yourself. Correct?
Good afternoon.
I need to remind you that you are still making your submissions to the committee under affirmation, and that still holds, still applies. Addressing you first, as if you're ready, Ms. Ford, would be Minister Husbands. Are you quite settled, Ms. Ford, already?
Just getting my specs. Okay, I'm ready now.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ford. I just want to take you back to our conversation from last time. We had spoken about some of the unusual events that would have taken place in relation to spending and reimbursement of the credit card for the chairman, who would have purchased some equipment online. And I think we'd spoken then about the issue of the reimbursement and whether or not the item or items were approved for purchase prior to the chairman using his personal credit card to get the items for the transport board.
So your question is whether or not there was prior approval?
Yes, if there was prior approval on it.
If I'm not mistaken, I think I left a copy of a memo, a board paper, which clearly stated that I was requesting post-approval.
That it was
That I was requesting post-approval.
post-approval.
Yes.
I think at the time you said that this was not necessarily a habitual thing that happened at the board during your time.
That's the first thing.
That was the first time that you'd experienced that.
First and last.
First and last, okay. Now, during the period, one of the things that the Auditor General's report had shown up was the constant repairs that were being done to certain vehicles all the time. And some predated you, but I noted that there were some that would have occurred during the time when you were general manager, that there were certain buses like B125, 122, and so on that had gone for frequent transmission changes. And during your time there, let's take, for example, BM109. It went to one company service provider on the 9th of November in 2016 to install a transmission. And by January of the following year, the 16th, it had another transmission installed by the same company. Then in 2017, in February 28th, it went to a different company and repairs were done to the transmission. And then 2017, in March, it went back to the same company to overhaul the transmission. The total cost to the transport board was about $89,000. So, based on how management does its oversight of the various entities, the various departments, would this have come to your attention? And if it did, what did you do or what did you put to the board to seek to remedy a situation such as this?
You're finished? That would not have come to my attention because it's the supervisor or the manager who is directly responsible for that area to whose attention it would be brought to. But that wouldn't be brought to my attention, so I won't be able to answer that question accurately.
So during management meetings, a situation like this would not have been raised with you?
No,
And the accountant would not have raised something like this with you?
the accountant or the financial controller, because there are two
Financial
positions,
controller.
it's financial controller and the accountant.
Okay,
Financial controller, no.
Would not have been raised? Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Finish? Thank you, Minister Husbands. Audit Office? Minister Husbands, could you turn off your microphone, please? Good afternoon, Mr. Trotman.
yeah.
You want to take the lead? Go ahead.
Yes, yeah. First of all, let me apologize for being a little bit late. Just a couple questions for.
Having difficulty hearing.
Okay, sorry. I don't know if you can take off your mask or not.
I don't know if you can take the mask.
Or I'll try to. I think I would have asked General Manager, past General Manager, a few questions already, but I will just ask just a few questions. The audit that we undertook, we were sort of carrying out an assessment of the transport board, its effectiveness and its efficiency over the period of time.
Mr. Trotman, you
No,
may
yeah.
need to remove, print the mask so we can hear. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
That's
Right.
okay.
I think the last time we met, I did ask a few questions to Ms. Ford, but just to reiterate.
Excuse me, Mr. Trotman. Marshall,
You
could
still not here?
Could you find from the technical people if there's any way to raise the volume? Still not hearing you,
I'll
Mr.
speak into the
Trotman.
mic some more.
It may not be you, it may be the volume is controlled.
Okay, can you hear me better?
Yeah.
Okay, right. As I said, I did ask a few questions the last time Ms. Ford was here, but just for clarity, and we are a little behind in the sense that there's a little time that this happened. What I was asking, is, what I was indicating is that we had conducted the audit to have a sense of a assessment of the efficiency and effectiveness of the transport board operations. And we noted some things that, like for instance, we realized that they had a steep decline in revenue. Ridership was also down significantly. There were a lot of, in some cases, surplus drivers, lengthy wait time for commuters, difficulty in making payments to suppliers, frequency of repairs, which were sometimes seen as costly. And to me, I wanted an assessment basically in terms of, since you were the head of the organization for that period, as to why these things occurred, what action the board would have taken to rectify them.
Reduction in revenue will be as a result of few buses on the road. What's the other question?
Well, there was not only the reduction in revenue, there was reduction in ridership.
Ridership would go hand in hand with the fact that there weren't enough buses on the road.
Right. And we were looking at the factors that caused these to occur and what the board would have done.
Inadequate funds being received from the Minister of Finance. Hmm?
Sorry,
Inadequate funding from the Minister of Finance.
right, in terms of,
Because we would have, every year we submit a supplementary
mhm,
requesting funds to cover our operation for the financial year.
mhm,
And you would find that sometimes what we find to be a realistic amount to assist us with the operations of the financial year, the Ministry of Finance didn't agree. There was always a fixed figure that we would receive.
So tell me something, because the Transport Board is providing a social service to a certain extent, and it's also seeking to operate in a way, in a commercial way, because it's competing with the
Yeah.
minibuses and things.
Yes,
Do you distinguish between the two and say, well, look, we need, in terms of school children and the elderly and so on, X amount, and then we will sort of make the difference in terms of the commercial? Do you distinguish between the two of them or not really?
No.
So how would you know if, like, in terms of the subsidy that you're asking for, is it as a result of a shortfall in terms of the commercial activity not being, making its fair share of the pie, so to speak?
How do we?
You have, on one hand, you're trying to provide a social service.
Mhm.
So you're asking government, well, look, in order to supply the social service, we need X or Y amount. Could you come up with a figure like that?
No, everything is done in one, everybody's lumped together.
Okay. So tell me something that during this period, then, as you said, you had a lot of, because of inadequate funds, you were not able to put a lot of buses on the road, right?
Mhm.
What happens to the drivers, the surplus drivers at that particular point in time? How do you deal with that? Like the fact that you might have a lot more drivers, because if you had 300 buses and now you only have 50 or 60, what? I'm just trying to understand what will happen to the drivers.
When we had, during my tenure, we never had 300 buses on the road.
That's just
It
a,
was approximately
okay, go ahead.
225.
Mhm.
That's the maximum I can recall. And during that period, my tenure, we retrenched persons during that time. In 2014, so a number of drivers were retrenched at that time.
So back to the question I was asking about in terms of the subsidy and so on. So it wouldn't make sense for you to indicate to government, well, look, we need a subsidy of X amount because we are providing a social service as distinct from the other aspect. You said all was lumped together. Because to some extent, you don't want government to necessarily to be providing for the inefficiencies of the operations otherwise. So let's say, for instance, that you need $20 million for the school children and the elderly. Then obviously we expected that government has asked you to do it, so they will provide you 20. But if you're asking for 25 or 30, then that would be a little challenging in that regard.
When the supplementary is done,
Mm.
we look at the incoming revenue and we look at the expenses. So based on the trend for passenger fares and based on the number of buses that we anticipate we'd have on the road, that's how we calculate our projection of revenue for passenger fares. The similar thing is done for school children and old age pensioners. And based on that, then we calculate our expenses, particularly wages and salaries, on the number of drivers we think we would need to deliver that service.
All right, just two more questions. So in terms of the whole issue of inadequate funding, you indicated that that was your major problem.
Yes.
So the
Yes, I did.
provision of funding you think would have solved the issue that you would have had?
Yes.
Or are there other issues other than funding?
Well, funding was the main problem.
Because when we look at funding, over the period that we looked at, you had perhaps as much as close to $400 million if you look at the revenue and the subsidies during that period, about 270-something million or $78 million, $370-something million during that period. But that, you don't think that you would need a lot more than that?
Then there were some expenses that we couldn't control, such as diesel costs that kept fluctuating and more on the higher side than the lower side. And of course, wages and salaries
Right.
and repairs and maintenance.
So you don't think that operational efficiency would play a part? Because you indicate that you want more funding, but if you're not operating efficiently, even if you get more funding, you would just be kind of wasting resources. So basically what I want to ask is what you would have done in terms of trying to improve the operational efficiency of the organization.
First, let me just state that the buses that we had on hand, the oldest bus was 25 years old. And in order to run more efficiently, as you had asked, I think we would have needed to purchase more newer buses. I think the oldest bus was in 1997, and the youngest was at that time, when I was there, 2006.
Right, so I was asking, how did you respond? I mean, you're saying theoretically, yeah, you should purchase more buses, but how did you
By
actually
writing to
respond?
the ministry, various ministries for assistance, purchasing new buses, explaining why. Several writings, not one.
Asking for funding or buses?
Both. Of course, not in the same correspondence.
So that was the main way in which you tried to tackle the problem.
Yeah.
Any other areas in terms of the actual operational efficiency that you would have tackled?
We looked at, seeing that we have extended all of the possible areas that we could have, we looked at having a special project where we would have picked out certain buses that we think we could fix, the ones with the low-hanging fruits. And for that, we got assistance from the fleet management consultant through the board of directors.
And was that successful in your view?
Pardon?
Was that project successful in your view?
In my view, it was.
How would you gauge that success?
During the period, I'm just speaking off the top of my head,
No
but
problem.
during the period, the last financial year that I was there, repairs and maintenance was reduced considerably. Right. That would all be included in the repairs and maintenance.
Sorry, that's it.
Yes.
But in terms of your fleet at that particular time was reduced considerably as well. So how do you know that the repairs were not as a result of the fleet reduction rather than efficiency as opposed to? No, I'm saying that you had indicated that at some point in time, the highest amount of buses that you had would have been 225.
That was way back in
Yeah.
2010,
Right.
2008.
No problem.
Yeah.
By the time you left, how much was it?
Operational, about between 80 to 100.
Right. So the bus fleet was cut in half, so to speak. So if
Mhm.
your cost is reduced, is it your cost a factor of the fleet reduction, rather than efficiencies?
No. To a point. To a point. To a point. Because you're saying that we would have had less buses on the road,
I'm asking, right?
which is true.
All right, so are there any other factors that you want to mention in terms of efficiency, in terms of initiative that the board would have undertaken? Or,
No.
Chair?
Thank you, Ms. Trotman. Ms. Ford,
Yes.
based on your role at the Transport Board as general manager, would it have come to your knowledge, would you have formed the opinion, would you have been led to believe that the Transport Board customarily had a high number of defective buses on the road? That statement was put to this, in effect, to this committee earlier. That the board was cash-strapped, that the buses were under stress because of the smaller number of overuse, and there were a lot of defective buses on the road.
I would say that every day at the Transport Board, we had some, what we call running defects of about between maybe 12 to 20 buses. And those running defects those buses would be leave in the morning about 4:45 in a good shape, and then by about 7:30, 8, 9, they're back in the yard for simple things like wipers, or I am not a mechanical person, but for simple things. So that's what we call running defects. So I wouldn't phrase it as we had a lot of defective buses on the road.
You would not agree with any statement we suggested at the Transport Board because of the pressure of small number of buses, lack of financial support from the ministry, put a number of buses on the road customarily that, in effect, were so defective, beyond those simple things, that they pose a threat to life and limb of people. You would not say that?
I would not say that.
You would disagree with any statement to that effect?
I wouldn't say that. That would have been dangerous.
Yeah, it would be, and you would
Yes.
disagree with any opinion coming out of the Transport Board that suggested that that was the case?
That was not the case. That wasn't the case. As I said, it was a running defects.
All right,
It's a running defects.
small issues.
Sitting from where I was sitting,
Okay.
and that was on a daily basis.
You chaired the management meetings?
I chaired, when I first went to Transport Board in 2010, I chaired management meetings on a monthly basis. First, we started out having them weekly, every Tuesday, but to my mind, and being in management for a number of years in the private sector, I found that having those meetings on a weekly basis proved nothing, because from week to week, you have the same concerns recurring. And in my opinion, I thought that monthly would have been more adequate.
So you shifted to monthly meetings?
Yes.
So during the the period under review by the Auditor General's Office covered in the report, 2015, 2018,
2018.
there would have been approximately how many meetings held if you shifted from weekly to monthly for 15, 16, 17, and 2018? 4 years or 3.5
On
years?
average, for those 3 years, I would say that we would have had, 12 months, probably about 6, 7 meetings, 8. And reason being that every time you want to have a monthly meeting, chances are that X number of managers are on vacation, so you will end up having a meeting either on vacation or on sick leave for whatever reason. You end up having a meeting with about 2 or 3 managers, which to me was pointless.
So you'd have had probably a minimum, approximately, so 6 or 7 meetings per year.
8 for the year, yeah.
Per year.
Not to say that I was not always in constant contact with the managers on a daily or weekly basis. If there's an emergency, of course I have a meeting. But to have it a standard meeting with all the managers, probably 8.
And those meetings obviously would have had documented minutes.
Yes, they would, because at that time, during that time, once again, using my management style, I found that having a monthly meeting with the general manager chairing the meeting, to me, I needed to empower my managers and give them more autonomy. And in doing that, I decided that we would have each manager from each department chair a meeting. Of course, I was always present at all of the meetings. And as such, the respective manager would have his or her secretary take the minutes for the meeting. And for the following meeting, those minutes would be sent out to the various managers through the secretary of the person who would have had the meeting previously. And we would copy the minutes and make any corrections during the meeting. And so each manager's secretary then would have copies of the minutes on their computer.
And they would have been compiled and stored in a specific place?
The manager would keep the manager for the respective department would keep the minutes. Mostly we didn't print the minutes for, what should I say, the respective manager for each department would have the minutes, yes, a copy of the minutes.
Would have a copy.
A copy of the minutes, either hard copy or soft copy.
And the general manager would have, of course.
I would have had a copy, but honestly speaking, I would take the minutes, the copy that I have, I would take to the following meeting, make any notes I want to make, and that was it.
Okay. I'm asking that because we requested copies of the minutes, and in 2015, we could only get minutes for 4 meetings.
Mm-mm. The respective managers, secretaries would have the minutes, soft and hard.
In 2016, we got copies of minutes for 7 meetings,
Mm.
which is pretty much in keeping with what you said, perhaps a minimum of 6 or 7 in any given year. In 2017, only 3. The minutes of only 3 meetings made available to us, and in 2018, only 3. And it was said to this committee that the minutes could not be found. Copies of these minutes could not be found.
Well, I won't be able to answer that for you because
You
I
have-
know that
you have-
all the secretaries, the respective secretaries for the managers would have
So
have
you're
the
saying
minutes.
that it should not have been a difficult matter for
Correct.
these minutes to be
To be
located
located.
at the transport board and provided
Correct.
to the, but they were not. And the now manager, I think he's still the manager,
Mr. Wharton?
insisted that he could find no more than this. And Miss, is it Scatlin? Is it Miss Catlin?
Miss Catwell, the
Catwell.
board secretary,
Yeah,
yeah,
she
that
could
time.
find no more copies other than those which she furnished.
I
out.
know I left them there.
You left them
And
there.
they should have them, yes.
And they should be there though.
And they should be there.
And if they're not there,
I can't respond.
you left in 2018? The board?
Yes.
Why did you leave in 2018? That's retirement?
Pardon me?
Why'd you leave in 2018?
Why?
Yeah,
I retired.
retirement. Okay. Happy retirement.
Second. Thanks.
All right.
Enjoying it to the fullest.
All right. During interview of Miss Sue,
Mhm.
Minister Jordan asked some pretty pertinent questions because Ms. Sue was expressing her concern over various important matters in the operational setup at the Transport Board. Bills being produced for work, monies being requested without proper documentation, the use of a system which had become a bit outdated for Transport Board purposes, improper use of the Magneto, is it Magneto or
Magneto,
Magneto?
Magneto,
Magneto system.
Mhm.
And she was also saying to the committee that, in fact, she was removed from a position of responsibility for stores and for beyond stores, I think it has something to do with statistics. You aware of that?
Do you want me to start with the last question first?
Well, you start where you want to start. Go ahead.
Okay. To my knowledge, the financial controller, Margaret Felicia Sue, never wrote to me about or informed me about her concerns as far as it pertained to the Magneto system. Yes, when I went to the transport board, the financial controller, Margaret Felicia Sue, she was responsible for statistics department. She was responsible for the finance department. She was responsible for, and revenue. The revenue department was connected to the finance. She was also responsible for the stores department. What else? I think that was about it. And to my mind, being the financial controller and responsible for, it was statistics and revenue, right? And responsible for statistics. The statistics department is a department where the cash taken in from drivers, they reconcile the cash that's taken in on a manually. And she was also responsible for the revenue department where the cash was going into. So to my mind, I thought that there should have been a, what I call separation of duties, if you want to call it that. Because I didn't think that for audit purposes that she should have been in charge of revenue and statistics. To me, that was a conflict of interest. And why I took the stores area from under her, from her being responsible for stores, is because every year we do an inventory of we conduct an audit on the inventory, and we're supposed to do what I would call, in my own banking language, a surprise audit of the inventory. And I also think that if she was in charge of the inventory, and she was the one also conducting the audit of the inventory, to me that was a no-no. So
All right.
That's why I separated those two departments from her management.
All right, she did indicate to the committee, Ms. Sue, that is, when she was here, that in fact she did write to you about her concerns about the Magneto system.
I have no recollection of that.
That was her, and when she was asked as to why she thought she was removed from being in charge of stores, etc., she gave two reasons. Because she felt that her constant and repeated writing of concerns to persons like yourself was proving to be problematic and objectionable, and therefore she was removed. She also said, second reason I had at that time was the store supervisor. The main person at that time was the husband of the accountant. Now, what in the world do you understand her to mean by that?
I don't understand. I can't speak for Felicia Sue, and
No, I'm not asking you to. I'm not asking you to speak for her. If you were to hear her say that, what would you understand by that?
About the
Yeah, the second reason why I was removed is because the store supervisor, the main person at the time, was the husband of the accountant.
Sir, all respects, I don't know.
All right.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. There's something I'm looking here for.
She said enough to this committee, Ms. Ford, to evoke or provoke this comment from Minister Jordan. Where I come from, they may call it stealing or thieving, but I understand the reason why you put it that way. Ms. Sue was laying some heavy charges against the management read the operations at the Transport Board with respect to how things were accounted for, how matters of concern addressed by her as the financial controller were being responded to and addressed. And she was being very negative in her language with respect to her view as to why things were happening the way they were happening. The language strongly suggests that she felt that there was dishonesty at the Transport Board, and her constant repeated reference to some of her concerns as the financial controller making people uncomfortable, and therefore what resulted was a shifting of her from responsibility for certain things and a lack of response to those letters of concern which she addressed to the quality assurance manager, which she addressed to herself, which she raised at management meetings.
What did she raise at management meetings again concerning the quality assurance manager? Did she say?
She raised all kinds of things. According to her, she wrote on all kinds of matters. Invoices, the question of over-invoicing, the question of repeated invoices, the question of bills or receipts submitted for work not being done, all kinds of things she is said to have raised in correspondence with the board and with the general manager and the quality assurance manager.
Do you have copies of the correspondence that I can see?
We have copies of some of those correspondence, which
Can
we
I see them, please?
which we can share with you. Do you have anything that you can say, Ms. Ford, to us that would give?
I have something as it pertains to her, her duties being shifted, which she said she knew nothing about. I think it's underneath.
No, not now. She can get it after.
That's it. Can you just give me a few minutes? A few more
That's all right,
minutes?
that's all
Thank
right.
you. That was. Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Okay. I have a copy of an email which I sent to Felicia Sue on the 2nd of February 2016. And it relates to an audit that we had done of canisters of the buses, because we do that periodically. However, Ms. Sue's response to me, she said, as FC, I have conducted an audit on the stores departments. I discussed my findings with Mr. Rowe the same evening on Sunday, January the 10th, 2016, and with Mr. Codrington the following day on Monday, January the 11th, 2016. Sorry, that was a surprise audit of the inventory in stores department that I had requested that she carry out. The email goes on to say, as stores is no longer under my direct authority, I respectfully suggest that the onus would be on the head of that department, the quality assurance manager, to provide the necessary justification for the substantial variances. This is important to note, Chair. You may recall that stores was removed from my responsibility simply because it was felt that as FC, it was inappropriate for me to be responsible for stores, conducting the audit, and providing justification. It is for this exact reason that this section was removed from my purview.
All right, thank you for that. There are several matters on which Ms. Sue said that she had written. She did insist, she wrote about the magneto system. She insisted that she wrote with reference to reconditioned transmissions. And not only did she write, she mentioned it several times at management meetings. She wrote about the fact that practices or protocols which had been put in place in several respects were not applied. Practices which should have been adopted were not being adopted or pursued.
I am not at all aware of any ratings received from the financial controller.
She said she wrote about stock-related issues. She wrote about oil usage, excess oil usage.
That is quite untrue, and I would say that, and you could put that in the minutes, it is untrue.
You're saying that what she said to this committee is not true?
What she said she sent me was untrue.
All right.
I don't know what the other things she might have said, but I can tell you about that one.
Things she said to the committee in relation to correspondence with you, those things are not true.
No,
Serious concerns about monies that were being spent on repairs and maintenance for buses, especially not seeing the results to an agreement in the amount that we were spending, etc. I wrote expressing my
Chair.
concerns at one point, wrote the general manager, even about productivity.
even about,
Productivity. Did she have a right to you with respect to the practice of checks being issued and dispensed for acquisition of services or supplies which had nothing to do with the operations at the Transport Board?
no,
So as she told
so
us
do you
that,
have those, do you have copies of those memos? That's
she
that's
told
what I
us-
need to know.
if she told us that, that would be incorrect as well?
Yes,
Did you ever have any concern at any time about the issue of any particular check or checks? Ms. Sue responded, I would say yes. Do you have any documentation where this is highlighted? I wrote again about the matter, yes, sir. She You had some concerns as well about checks being issued to the chairman of the board for purchases which the chairman made apparently or allegedly in the interests of the board.
That would have to be the special project, and for each time the chairman, and it all pertains to the same when he used his credit card. Those were all wrapped on each. I got all the receipts, sent them to her with memos, and I have copies of all the memos that I sent to her,
All right, let's deal with a couple.
asking her to check, ensure that everything is correct, and if she's satisfied, then she can sign off on it. If she has any problems, then she could have referred the matter to me.
All right, let's deal with a couple of old matters that we'd like to get your perspective on. In knowledge of the missing bus, BM 506?
I know nothing about BM 506.
Nothing at all about BM 506?
Absolutely nothing.
It went missing before or subsequent to your tenure?
I don't, I just said I know nothing about BM
Nothing at
506.
all?
So I don't know if it went missing, and
So you don't
that
know
would
if
be BM 506. It would be the shell of BM. That is,
But what do you want to tell us, that you know nothing about it?
I know nothing about it. No.
But you're saying it
nothing.
would be the shell. You're saying to us
Okay,
you
a
don't know
bus
anything about
does
it and
not
it
go.
would be
A
the shell.
bus doesn't go missing. When buses are written out of record, we first have to write the Ministry of Transport and Works, take the buses up there, have them, or they come down to our workplace and ensure that the buses can be written out of records. After that is done, and we give them a list of buses for them to check. After that is done, and we get approval from them, then we have to go to the Ministry of Finance to get approval to board the buses. And as I've said before, I know nothing about BM 506. As far as I'm concerned, BM 506 would have been a bus on the board. If it is that it was sold, we only sell shells, not a bus.
You had heard prior to the last moment, you had heard prior to just now that it was missing and it wasn't accounted for?
I saw it in the Auditor General report.
Auditor General's report.
Yeah.
And you were not part of any transaction by which the shell of BM 506 was sold to Mr. Catlin or any other purchaser?
No, sir.
You're as much mystified by the whereabouts of BM 506 as we are,
And the Auditor General is.
and the Auditor General is.
Mhm.
Any statement you want to make to us about the matter of over-invoicing, overpayment for repair transaction?
I can't make any statement on those, no.
The
If
Auditor
you have
General-
questions,
The Auditor General suggested that there were instances of over-invoicing.
Mhm.
Over-invoicing
Yes.
relative to repairs. You know nothing about that?
No,
Okay.
not until I saw it in the Auditor General's report.
And the matter of acquisition of reconditioned transmissions,
Mhm.
you're not,
That was an activity, if you want to call it that, that was approved by the Board of Directors, that we purchased the reconditioned transmissions from a company, I think it's ATS or AST.
that's a local company or
No,
overseas company?
overseas, in the States.
But we were led to the opinion that,
No, not APCO, it was ATS or AST.
we were led to the opinion that the reconditioned transmissions were preferably sourced locally as
I-
opposed to cheaper availability from overseas. We were led to believe
Uh-huh.
that the board had an opportunity to purchase reconditioned transmissions from overseas at a far cheaper price than available locally, but
Yes.
yet a policy and practice of acquiring them locally was pursued.
No, not since when we got from and it was Mr. Bartholomew, the fleet management consultant, who gave us the connection with the ATS company in United States, because apparently he was the deputy manager of the transport system in transport company in Trinidad, and we got the connection or the referral from him about this company, and he was the one who helped us more or less to get the reconditioned transmissions from that company at a lower price. But I'm not aware of the fact that we could have gotten reconditioned transmissions locally.
Well, unless I'm mistaken.
That never came to us,
Unless
not
I'm
ever came to my
mistaken-
attention.
Unless I'm mistaken, the committee, and members could correct me if I'm wrong, the committee would have been told that you did have the opportunity to acquire transmissions from overseas at a cheaper price,
Mhm.
but that you were forced to acquire them locally, because if you acquired them from overseas at that cheaper price, you had to pay a cash, which you did not have.
No, at that time, at the time it was 2016, that's why we purchased them in batches of 10. And it was cheaper to purchase those reconditioned transmissions in batches of 10 than it was to buy one new transmission in Barbados.
But that is what we were made to understand. But further, we were made to understand that the choice, in spite of that, the choice was made to acquire them locally, because if you sourced them overseas, you had to pay cash.
I don't know, I'm not familiar with that.
Well, you would have been intimately knowledgeable of those issues as the general manager?
I should be, yes, as I was with the reconditioned transmissions that were purchased from overseas.
Okay.
And with the reconditioned transmissions, we were given 30 days within which you can pay for them.
Were you happy with the service that you were getting from, what's the name of the company? Transtech, is it? Mr. Brathwaite? As far as you know, was the transport board happy with the service you were getting from Transtech? Was there anything about the relationship with with Transtech that concerned you or displeased you? Is it Transtech?
What I can honestly say is that as I've been saying before, honestly, the owner of Transtech never liked to have conversations with me.
The general manager?
Mhm. He said he didn't like to deal with me, so he dealt with the quality assurance manager.
Mr. Codrington?
Yes. I knew Mr. Brathwaite in
But
my
did you
previous
form-
life,
Did you form?
work life.
Okay, did you form any opinion as to the contractual arrangements between Transport Board and Transtech repairs?
I came and found it, and no.
But you chaired the management meetings and you attended the board meetings.
Yes,
There was never any issue raised with respect to the quality of service
that I got from
provided by Transtech and the reason
No.
for the repeated repairs of certain vehicles?
No,
It was never discussed?
no, not to my own, no.
Let me just refresh your memory, Ms. Ford. In the special audit prepared by the Auditor General at 211, it said that it was observed that during the period 2015 to 2018, the board was obtaining reconditioned transmissions from a local supplier, with the lowest cost being $22,460 per unit.
During the period 2015 to 2018, that's what you said?
Yes,
Mm.
2015 to 2018. Having been informed in July 2014 of reconditioned Allison transmissions costing $5,576. This is page 13. Exclusive of shipping from a company in the United States, the board subsequently commenced purchasing transmissions from this supplier. Payment of 50% of the cost of the first shipment was made in November 2014. Subsequently, the supplier offered a rebate in return for old transmissions. The board's records show that 45 reconditioned transmissions were paid for from this overseas supplier between November 2014 and May 2018. It then goes on to say at 212, from March 2015 until May 2018, during the same period, information seen indicates that the local supplier installed at least 123 transmissions for the transport board. That's the same period. And when the total cost was $2.8 million. Based on the payment of the first 10 transmissions obtained from the first supplier in the United States, one transmission purchase cost approximately $6,396. Therefore, if the same amount of reconditioned transmissions were purchased from this overseas supplier, the cost would have been cheaper by approximately $2 million. The savings would be even higher since this analysis is based on the original cost of the transmission. The board's personnel indicated that the lack of funds prevented the purchase of more reconditioned transmissions from this overseas supplier, who had to be paid in cash, unlike the local supplier who offered a credit facility.
I would not say the local supplier offered a credit facility. A credit facility was offered by only one supplier. I think that what the board personnel should have said instead is that payment was delayed to this particular supplier. They didn't have a credit facility, so that's misleading.
How do you account then for the determination to take 123 transmissions at an additional cost of $2 million when the overseas transmissions were available and would have cost the board $800,000?
I can't speak to you about that as a person who's mechanically knowledgeable. But what I can say is that if you're we have, let's say 150 buses and that are workable at that point in time. And then we're ordering the transmissions in tranches of 10. The transmissions, and I'm just speaking logically, I'm just thinking out loud. I'm not speaking as a person who's familiar with mechanics or engineering of any vehicle. And if it is you're buying the transmissions in batches of 10, and we only started buying these transmissions from, I think it was 2014, 2015. It takes a while for the transmissions to get from the company in the States to Barbados. So I do believe that during that period, and the bus needs a transmission, and we need to put buses on the road, to me, logically thinking, you have to use the local supplier. Secondly, when the transmissions come, the reconditioned transmissions come, and they're fitted into the buses, in order for us to get the rebate, we have to wait until each reconditioned transmission has been fitted in the bus, and then we send back the 10 old transmissions. They have to be packed, shipped, and everything. So that's another lapse in period. So to me, you would need to get, if you need to get buses on the road, you would need to utilize the local supplier. Not that you're utilizing them because of any other reason, but to me, that's the logical reason.
My concern with that is that as a manager, if you have cash difficulties and you have a differential of between 22 and 6,000, that's about what? $16,000 difference in the cost of transmission. Then I would, as a manager, you would need to undertake to speak to the Ministry of Finance to demonstrate that money could be saved, significant sums, because those are not small sums, significant sums could be saved by being able to get a lump sum to bring in the transmissions, not just 10 at a time. Could you share with us what steps you would have taken in looking at these figures to try to rectify a situation where you ended up purchasing only 45 at the lower price of about 6,000 to purchasing 123 at the price of 22,000? Who authorized the purchases?
Which purchases?
The transmissions. Who determines where you buy transmissions from?
The fact about going to the ministry and calling the ministry and preparing writing to go to the ministry about transmissions is very well said. But the actual action, and in order to, it isn't done like that. I'm sure you will be familiar with the process. It's not that easy. It's not that simple. If it were that simple, surely we would have done that. We don't
What were the impediments?
purchase transmissions from the individual. The bus will go to the, well, if you want to say purchase, if it's written in the invoice, the bus would go to the respective service provider, and they would, if the transmission is down and they need a new transmission, the person would install the transmission.
So was any attempt made to make a presentation, either via yourself as general manager or the chairman of the board, to the Ministry of Transport and Works? Because after all, the Ministry of Transport and Works would be the entity that would be giving you government money to keep the transport board running. Did you take any steps to put a position to them as to how savings could have been realized by being able to purchase from the overseas supplier?
On December the 31st, 2015, a position was put to the Ministry of Finance regarding the purchase of parts, tools, payment of creditors to, a board paper was presented to the Ministry of Finance regarding that, December 2015,
December
which will
2015.
encompass everything.
And you're saying that the Ministry of Finance, on being presented with the argument of the savings that could be made from purchasing the transmissions overseas,
Not only
that
transmissions, all other parts.
that they, in looking at that argument, decided in favor of not forwarding the money, but sticking with the local supplier?
I didn't say that. We asked for $1 million and we got $982,000 as is recorded in the paper that was done.
And this went on
The
then,
approval that was given by the,
and this went on then for 3 years,
which
between
this,
2015 to 2018.
what went on for 3 years?
The purchases were made between 2015 and
Mhm.
2018. You said that in 2015, you were
We did,
refused the $1 million that you had
I
requested.
received $982,000 instead.
So you were just 100,000 short.
Approximately.
Okay. And why were those monies not put towards the transmission so that you could realize the savings? Who determined that you would
Transmissions were
stick?
not the only thing that those funds covered. They covered payment to outstanding local creditors too.
So how much of the monies requested pertain to transmissions?
I really can't tell you that. I don't recall.
And therefore, on the following year, did you make another attempt to deal with this issue because you would have been
In
losing?
2017? In 2017?
2016, 2017, 2018.
No, even if we would have written to the Ministry of Finance, we have written to the Ministry of Transport and Works, as I've said before, for funds to assist with the purchase of, parts, payment of creditors, etc. We would always wrote to those two ministries. But we did not specify to buy transmissions or no.
So the issue of rectifying the purchase of transmissions did not figure largely in your presentation to either ministries.
It would have been part of it, but it would not have been highlighted.
So they were not given the opportunity to recognize then the tremendous savings that could have been achieved by bringing transmissions from overseas.
The board of directors, they were given the opportunity to see that there would have been savings by purchasing the transmissions from overseas.
So the decision was made by the board. What position did you put to the board in relation to this matter?
It was a board paper.
You have a copy of it?
No, I don't.
Okay. And what did the board say in relation to your presentation?
They agreed with the purchase of the reconditioned transmissions,
That was early in 2015.
and it continued.
You bought during that period 123 from the local supplier versus 45 from the overseas supplier. Between that period, 2015 to 2018,
The
according to the
records,
Auditor General.
yeah, the records show that.
Hmm?
The records show that.
Yes. So what was the board's position about the fact that you were still purchasing from the overseas, from the domestic supplier rather than the overseas supplier? Did they direct you to continue taking from the domestic supplier?
I must say that the transmissions from the domestic supplier were reduced significantly, the purchase of transmissions, according to you.
When you say reduced, do you mean in number or price?
I think they both go hand in hand.
That was not reflected here. I don't
Well,
know
I
if the
understand.
Auditor
I won't be able
General
to tell you
could
that.
speak to this, but based on what the Auditor General has here, the lowest cost for a transmission was $22,000. And therefore, at no time during the period 2015 to 2018 did the board ever experience any reduction or rebate on the purchase of those 123 transmissions. So my question is, who made the determination? Were you instructed by the board to continue as usual? Who made the determination that you would continue with the local transmissions when the overseas transmissions were available?
When the funds were depleted, as far as we're concerned, for the purchase of the transmissions from overseas, we had no other alternative but to continue using the local supplier, whoever it may be.
So the 900,000 was to last you for 3 years? Or?
I'm not so sure. They didn't give you a time frame.
Hmm?
We weren't given a time frame as to how long it was supposed to last.
And therefore, when you produced your estimates each year, did you put in to get transmissions from the United States at the lower price, or did you make provision for the higher cost transmissions?
When we
Because your estimates, your budget requests would have to reflect what you're going to buy and what would be the approximate cost.
Not necessarily so. What we did, we would provide a figure for repairs and maintenance, never a figure for purchases as such, and that was all lumped together in the bottom line, if you want to call it, for repairs and maintenance.
That seems a little unusual to me. If you are planning for an organization, whether government, private, doesn't matter. If you are putting forward a request for funds to be able to run the organization, then your costs are made up of how much you anticipate you're going to buy in that year and how much it will actually cost. And that's how you arrive at the figure. What you are suggesting is that a figure is pulled out of the air and dropped in estimates without reference to what you're going to buy and how much you're going to pay for it.
It's not pulled out of the air.
Okay.
Conversation is held with the financial controller and the respective department heads as to what they will be doing during the course of the year, or what they plan to do.
So provision would have been made to purchase the $22,000 transmission then?
Pardon me?
When you were
Sorry about that.
estimating how many transmissions you were going to provide for, seeing that you had an aging fleet, seeing that you had a fleet that was constantly getting new transmissions for the same vehicle, 4 within the space of about 2 years, and most transmissions I know can last sometimes as long as the vehicle itself.
I don't agree.
Well, they certainly would not be destroyed within a year.
Once again, I would reiterate, I am not a mechanic, and I would be answering these questions just on logic. I really, so the way how you are going down and asking about transmit, I can't respond to that. I think the person for you to speak to about that would be the quality assurance manager in conjunction with myself.
Right, so the question I'm asking, the preparation of the budget that would have to be submitted to the Ministry of Transport and Works to get funds, you would have to make provision for the items that you need to make the organization run well. With the high level of transmissions that were being changed so frequently and at so high a cost, what provisions were made within your budget for the purchase of transmissions? Did you make provision for the ones bought overseas, or was provision made for the ones bought locally?
Once again, it was done based on repairs and maintenance.
But which figure did you all use to calculate?
I really can't remember.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you,
You're
Minister.
welcome.
Husbands, Mr. Jordan?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Ford, for coming.
You're
Something I heard in an earlier intervention, this question or the response had to do with management meetings. The question had to do with the cost of transmissions. It had to do with the frequency of repairs to particular units. So I just want to be reminded, did I hear that the management meetings, that kind of information did not come up at management meetings?
As to how often the
That there were like particular
transmission?
units that were
No.
repeatedly being repaired?
No,
That didn't come. Okay.
no.
No, the reason why I asked that, I say to everybody who I speak to, I don't ask straight questions. So this is just straight questions. It has to do with governance and the purpose and the use of management meetings. Because I take it that management meetings are meetings that are intended to ensure that somebody used the term earlier, operational efficiency, that what is happening on a day-to-day basis, they're not board meetings. They refer to the day-to-day running of the business of the organization. What I heard afterward was that in determining what information was sent to the Ministry of Transport and Works and the Ministry of Finance, and this is in relation to supplementary, I think that was the term that I heard, I understand that information was put together to populate the document that would have been sent. The document, from what I heard, would speak to the fact that you needed a certain amount of money to spend in particular areas. My question is, in the management meetings, irrespective of who would have chaired the management meetings,
Mhm.
what kind of information did the management team receive from finance that allowed you to be able, that allowed you as GM, but also you, the rest of the management team,
Mhm.
to be able to make the decisions that would lend themselves to an efficient operation?
At the management meetings, when it's time for around the time when the estimates are supposed to be discussed with the respective Ministry of Transport and Works, and then by extension, the Ministry of Finance. Prior to those meetings, I mean, we have our management meeting. First, the financial controller would go, as I said before, would go to each manager and find out what's going on. Let's take, for instance, in particular, operations department, which is the department that's responsible for the buses being on the road. We would, the financial controller would find out, well, how many buses do you think you will need for the year to bring in X amount of money? And she in turn two of them would sit down together and calculate what they think they would need, how many buses they think they would need on the road. Then that information is, the financial controller takes that and she calculates the projected revenue. And then at the board meeting, at the management meeting, we sit down and we discuss exactly what each manager would have said and agree to the figure that we should put in the estimates.
All right, thank you very much. So that speaks to the process for preparing the estimates.
Yeah.
Now, management meetings, other than management meetings that spoke to estimate preparation,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of information did you get from the financial control? In other words, when you're getting management information, financial information that is designed for management use,
Mm-hmm.
what kind of information did you get if you weren't getting information that said or that would suggest to you these units are a problem? We're spending money on these all the time and I'm not sure what is going on. We need to do something about it. If you're not getting that kind of information, what kind of information were you getting that would have been useful in managing the operation?
At the management meeting, from the financial controllers end or from the accounting end, you just know things like, we don't have any money. I said, "What? We don't have any." Huh? Yeah, I will come to that. We don't have any money, and this is what we need to do, but we have no money to get this, and we need to go to the Ministry of Finance to get some funds. The quality assurance manager, he would then say, he would note that X amount of buses are defective, and this is what has to be done, but they're working on getting parts from the stores department and ultimately from the service providers to fix the respective buses that need to be fixed, that he thinks can be fixed without costing the board a very high amount of funds to be fixed. We would get information from the Human Resources Department as far as it relates to any outstanding disciplinary matters, anything to do with the Barbados Workers Union, if you have any outstanding matters with them. And from the operations department, we would know the manager there would tell us any new routes that she might be looking at, where the routes that may be bringing in, the lucrative routes that we can use, any concerns she might have with the private service vehicles. And basically that's it, except for marketing.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you to say is that the focus was, well, really in two areas. One is that you don't have any money. So what I heard you to say was that seemed to have been what is referred to as a refrain,
Yes.
that you heard it all the time, every time, that there is no money. And I am also hearing you to say that, well, the suggestion that I'm getting from you is that the focus seemed to be on revenue, because you spoke to the amount of money coming in. You also spoke most recently to the matter of the routes that could be considered lucrative, and you sounded as though you were also speaking to competition from public service, privately owned public service vehicles. Now, did the management team focus in any rigorous way on the cost side? Because the bottom line is made up of a top line and the lines underneath the top line. And those lines under the top line are cost lines, whether direct overhead costs or then other variable costs. So was there any focus on costs, any rigorous attention being paid to the costs in the operation?
Particularly in the repairs and maintenance of the vehicles. And it was as a result of that we engaged the services of the fleet management consultant.
Okay, so you say there was focus on repairs and maintenance.
The quality assurance area, yeah.
Right. Now, that focus, are you suggesting that focus did not include an issue such as the fact that a unit or particular units just seem very problematic? Because you're talking about repairs and maintenance, which includes maintenance of the units, the buses, and there are some of those units that are problematic to the organization, being repaired over and over and over, and then you still have to repair them again. But you're saying that information did not come to the management meeting. What information came to the management meeting in relation to, and I'm not talking about specific, but generally speaking, what kind of information came in relation to repairs and maintenance? Was it information that would allow you to make a decision on units, or was it global information that says repairs and maintenance costs are high?
It was both. It was both. A couple of years after joining, and not during the period under review now, but a couple of years after joining the institution, there were some units that were problematic, and we found that we were repairing them constantly for different things. And it was more to repair those units than it would have been if we had looked at purchasing a bus, to be frank. And those units, we asked that they be viewed by the Ministry of Transport and Works and eventually boarded. And there were a number of units like that. I don't remember the amount. And going now to, fast forward now to 2015-18, when you say units that were repaired over and over, I'm sure you're referring to these 4 units in here that are 4 or 6 units in here that were mentioned by the Auditor General. Are you?
Sorry?
No. When you say these units that had to be repaired over and over for the same thing, are you referring to these units that are mentioned on page 20?
Yeah, we're
Because I really don't
we're
look
examining the Auditor General's report.
right, but I
So-
don't look at bus numbers when we're
No,
signing off
I'm
on
not
checks.
asking, but I'm not asking
Oh.
of you. I'm not asking if you did. I'm asking about the financial controller. Because the financial controller is one of the persons, maybe the principal person, who has or is supposed to have an eagle eye on costs and on revenue, the numbers, the financial things. So my question to you had to do with what information came from your finance people, those who you relied on to give you financial information, and who you would have relied on to interrogate the financial information and give you something that you could make a decision with as GM. I don't expect you to be the financial controller. You have a financial controller. My question is, given that there are units identified, that was my original question, did that come to the management meeting? Were you in possession of information that would allow you to make a decision on those units highlighted?
Surely not these, nor any other.
I'm also hearing you to say now that you're saying after the period covered by the audit, there began to be a focus on some, well, you began to analyze information that suggested to you it would sometimes be less costly to buy a new bus than to repair some of the buses based on the information that you were receiving. But you said it was after.
Not after, no, it would
Not
be
after?
after I joined the organization, probably 2 years or so after. Prior to the first retrenchment, and the first retrenchment was in 2014, because at that time we were really delving into to costs and what's going on in the organization, as far as the repairs and maintenance is concerned, because that figure was extremely high.
All right, I'm a little bit confused. So let me ask a question. Was the financial controller at that time the same as the financial controller who did not share that there were particular units that were problematic?
The information I'm referring to came from the quality assurance manager, not the financial controller.
Okay, so the quality assurance manager was the one who was highlighting
Yes.
the challenges?
Yes.
Okay. The financial controller at the time, the financial controller, I don't want to ask too strange a question, but let me ask it the way it just came to my mind.
Okay.
Did the financial controller add any value to the management meeting in relation to giving advice on how the transport board should deal with these matters?
No.
Thank you very much. Sure.
Thank you, Minister. Any further queries? Senator Nurse, Senator Driggs?
None from me, Chair, at the moment.
Thank you, Senator Nurse. Mr. Trotman, from your side? No. Okay. Mr. Husband?
I think Minister Colin Jordan helped to clarify and bring certain things into perspective.
Yes, his questioning was excellent and on
So-
point.
So he identified that in the management meetings, that it was the quality assurance person who brought to the attention of the management meeting the high costs that were going on in terms of parts and maintenance and repairs. He was able to identify that the financial controller did not necessarily add value to the analysis of this particular situation. During the same period that we're discussing, we understand that they would have secured the services of a consultant because this problem of maintenance, repairs, and keeping the buses on the road and the high costs were a particular issue, and the idea is that the consultant will help the board to rectify the problem. So therefore, one would be able to assume then that keen attention was being paid to the issue of repairs, maintenance, costs, because it was highlighted and a consultant was hired to try to help you deal with that situation. Would that be a fair thing to say, that this now was the focus of attention of the board when you had the consultant on board and he?
Correct.
Good. So on the issue then of how to deal with the matter of the cost of the transmissions and which transmissions were bought, who made the determination to continue with the local transmissions versus the
I think I
overseas
explained that
transmissions?
already, Ms. Husbands.
In terms of, I'm asking who made the determination?
Who
Was
made-
it the quality assurance controller? Was it the board? Was it the financial controller?
The quality assurance manager is in charge of repairs and maintenance of the board's buses. And if it is that there's a bus that needs a transmission and one is not readily available, the reconditioned one's not readily available, but then he or the quality assurance officer, particularly if they need to get the bus back on the road in a quick manner, would decide which service provider they would send the bus to.
So when y'all were discussing and watching and monitoring the progress of the board in that situation, the agreement then around the table was that you would continue with the local transmissions as opposed to the overseas transmissions?
That was not discussed at the management meeting.
So the determination was made by the quality assurance on his own then?
That's his job.
And when you were looking back at the expenses and the cost and so on, as general manager, you never brought up a discussion with him to account for the decision that was being made as it was impacting the cost of the operations?
With the hiring of the fleet management consultant, as I think I've said before, repairs and maintenance the cost of repairs and maintenance were reduced.
No, we're talking about we did see a reduction in some of the parts, but there was no reduction with regards to the transmissions, which were the higher costs that y'all were
The transmissions are not,
incurring.
they are not an accounting line in the expenses. There's repairs and maintenance. So it would not be separated.
Yes, and therefore, when you were looking at the cost, because you said that this was a problem, the maintenance and the cost, and it was the focus of the team when you had the consultant brought in, and therefore, this was where the central concern was. So
What is where the central concern was? Transmissions?
the issue of the cost of repairs, of which the transmissions was probably one of the biggest costs you had,
Transmissions, engines. Mm-hmm.
yes?
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that in your discussions, the team did not make the determination as to what would happen in relation to where you would get transmissions, that the quality assurance manager made this on his own.
He was the one responsible for the department.
So he made the decision on his own?
Yeah. He would have made a decision where the transmissions would, where the buses would go for transmissions to be fixed. It could go to one or two service providers.
And he would not have to account to you or to the financial controller over that decision when it impacted the cost?
It's either one or two service providers, or they were done, since the fleet management consultant came in, the transmissions were repaired at the board, at Mangrove.
Okay, so we can conclude then that the quality assurance manager was the person who made that determination, and there was no consultation with you all in relation to the cost as it affected the cost of repairs and maintenance.
The quality assurance manager made decisions for the buses to be repaired by service providers.
Right, and he didn't have to consult with you, and you did not ask about it when it affected the costs? You
When
didn't
what
inquire?
affected the cost?
The cost of the transmissions.
Once again, I will reiterate that the quality assurance manager is responsible for his department and sending the various buses to whichever service provider.
However, the overall responsibility for the transport board would have been yours. And so I was just asking if this was a decision he could make on his own without reference to you. This is a decision that you did not question or ask for an explanation as to what was happening.
It was never brought out. It was never, transmissions, the cost of transmissions was never pulled out of the actual cost for repairs and maintenance, and it wasn't a discussion at management meetings as such. Only when when the fleet management consultant indicated that he can get transmissions cheaper.
So it did come
And
up.
I came into the organization with those particular service providers fixing transmissions.
Right. So it did come up. The fleet consultant did bring it up. And
Before
put a
he was-
position to
Yeah,
you.
okay, continue, sorry about that.
Hmm?
Continue. You were saying something as I interrupted you, sorry.
No, that's all right. No, I was saying that it was brought up, but you're saying it was brought up by the fleet consultant. In other words, it was highlighted as an issue at a management meeting. Otherwise, he would not have suggested a change.
The fleet management consultant, prior to being titled the fleet management consultant, prior to being a consultant on the board, he had visited the transport board, I think it was back in 1990-some, that's how we met him. And he realized that we were having challenges with the transmissions and engines way back then. And when he came here, then we consulted him, actually. I think it was the chairman who consulted him because he had heard about him through the operations manager. And he's the one then who said, well, this happens in Trinidad. We also have similar problems, and this is the company that we can use because they're very expensive at the domestic level in Trinidad too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how he came in, but it wasn't done when he was the fleet management consultant.
Or
I mean, we
none
didn't purchase.
were purchased while he
While he
was
no.
there. Okay, thank you.
Thank
I
you.
think he started in 2016. I think it was 2016. But we were having conversations with him before he actually got the title as fleet management consultant.
Thank you, Minister Husbands. Ms. Ford, were you happy with the recruitment of Mr. Bartholomew to deal with fleet issues
Yes,
and his performance?
yes.
You were involved in his recruitment?
To some extent,
Do you want to clarify for me, please?
in that I am the one who would have sent the email to his boss then in Trinidad on the behalf of the board of directors, saying that we are interested in recruiting him to work with us for a period of time. But of course, that was after the board of directors had given the approval.
Were you happy with the relationship between Mr. Bartholomew and the quality assurance manager and the quality assurance department?
My understanding that the personalities clash.
Well, personalities can clash, but you can still operate even in that context in the interest of the organization. Were you satisfied that the working relationship was
No,
no? Okay. All right. You said you know nothing about the arrangements with Transtech. You weren't
I came and
involved.
found that,
You
no.
weren't involved in that, and he had no dealings with you. And you said that Ms. Sue did not tell you anything in writing related to procedures, check issues, invoicing issues, accounting issues, etc.
No.
And then if therefore she said that to us, that is incorrect insofar as you
As far as
understand.
I'm concerned,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. Now, were you ever, by anybody above yourself, in relation to the board, I suppose, operations of the transport board, or outside of that in the political sphere, were you ever instructed by anybody to do anything that you considered to be outside of the recommended parameters of operations of the transport board? In other words, were you ever, the question was put to Ms. Sue and in fact, your financial controller, and she said yes to that. Were you ever given any instructions by anybody, either the management of the transport board, board of directors, the transport board, anybody in the political arena? Were you ever instructed by anybody above yourself to do anything that was contrary to regulations, policies of the board?
That's your question to me, or that's your time, that's the question to her?
That's the question put to her, and I'm putting it to you.
Okay.
She said
Hell
yes.
no. Hell no.
All right. No would suffice.
I don't operate at that level. Nope.
All right.
Mm-mm.
Unless there
That
is
was
a
not-
question.
that was
Mr.
not
Trotman,
put in
you're
the
done?
minutes.
No.
No, I don't operate at that
Ms.
level.
Minister Husbands, Minister Jordan,
Mm-mm.
all senators? Senators, any queries?
Nothing.
Not at this time?
Additional questions, I mean,
Any-
not at this.
Any question, Senator Trix, yet?
I am listening intently, but not at this
All right,
time.
and we thank you for your intense interest. Ms. Ford, I want to thank you on behalf of the committee for coming again today, taking your time to share your perspective on matters. Obviously, these are serious matters, and the comments of the Auditor General in the relevant report are so weighty as would cause concern to interested Barbadians and certainly to the members that constitute this committee. And we thank you for giving your perspective. That will help us to come to the kind of conclusions that we may be led to report to the Parliament of Barbados in such a way as that the operations at the entity and other entities in the public arena of Barbados may be improved in the interests of Barbadians.
Thank
So
you.
I thank you, and I thank you, Mr. Pierce.
The pleasure is mine.
There are some refreshments over there. I think you're invited and welcome to partake of that before you leave because you've been here for a couple of hours. So I thank you. You can take your leave. You can take your leave, Ms. Ford and Mr. Pierce. And you can instruct them to cut the public feed, Mr. Marsh. I think he understood me, Then he can instruct the people to stop the broadcast.